In the early morning hours, Paris looked the same as it always had. The cafes opened their shutters. Bakers dusted flour from their hands. The bells of Notre Dame rang on schedule. And yet, beneath this familiar rhythm, something invisible was already dying. Money, not through fire, not through invasion, not through revolution, but through numbers that no longer meant what they once did. By the time most French citizens realized something was wrong, it was already too late to stop. Prices were rising not gradually, not predictably, but violently. A loaf of bread that cost one amount in the morning could cost double by nightfall. Wages arrived late and left early. Savings evaporated without warning. Contracts became meaningless the moment they were signed. This was not the famous French Revolution. This was not the storming of the Bastille. This was something quieter and far more dangerous. Hyperinflation, a slow-burning economic poison that does not announce itself with gunfire, but with confusion, panic, and denial. It turns trust into suspicion, arithmetic into chaos, and a nation into a room full of people shouting different prices at the same time. France had survived wars, kings, and guillotines, but now it faced an enemy that could not be executed, imprisoned, or negotiated with. Numbers on paper. At first, the government insisted everything was under control. Officials spoke of temporary pressures and necessary adjustments. Newspapers reassured readers that this was merely the cost of recovery, that confidence itself was the cure. But confidence cannot be printed. Behind closed doors, the French state was already drowning. Years of war, debt, and political paralysis had hollowed out the treasury. To keep the system running, the government had done what desperate governments always do. It printed, and printed, and printed again. Each new banknote promised stability. Each one delivered the opposite. What made this hyperinflation especially dangerous was not its speed, but its timing. France was not collapsing in chaos. It was trying to rebuild, trying to return to normal life, trying to believe that the worst was over. Instead, the currency itself became the battlefield. This is the story of how France nearly destroyed itself not with armies, but with ink. How money lost its meaning, and how a modern nation came terrifyingly close to economic self-annihilation. In the next part, we go back to the moment this disaster became inevitable, when war debts, political fear, and denial quietly set the stage for collapse. Every hyperinflation has a beginning, not a single moment, but a decision that seems reasonable at the time. For France, that decision was war. Not just the fighting itself, but the bill that arrived afterward. By the end of the First World War, France had won militarily, but it was financially mutilated. Entire regions of the country lay in ruins. Railways were twisted metal. Factories were rubble. The state needed money immediately, vast sums to rebuild, to pay pensions, to stabilize society before unrest took hold. But France did not have that money. Before the war, the French franc had been anchored by gold and confidence. After the war, both were gone. The gold reserves were depleted. Confidence had been replaced by trauma and fear, and yet the demands on the state multiplied by the day. The government faced a brutal dilemma. Raise taxes sharply on risk, social explosion. Cut spending and abandon veterans, widows, and shattered regions. Borrow abroad and submit to foreign creditors, especially the United States. Or print. Printing felt like the least painful option. It avoided immediate confrontation. It delayed consequences, and politically, delay was everything. So the presses began to run. At first, it was justified as temporary. Emergency money for emergency conditions. Officials spoke of reconstruction, of short-term liquidity, of confidence returning once the wounds of war healed. But wars do not end when the shooting stops. France was also owed massive reparations from Germany. On paper, these payments would solve everything. Politicians spoke of German gold flowing into French coffers, restoring balance, stabilizing the franc, but reparations were not money in hand. They were promises contested, delayed, and politically explosive. Germany struggled. Negotiations dragged on. Payments stalled. Meanwhile, France still had to pay its own debt, especially to Britain and the United States. Interest accumulated, deadlines approached. The pressure tightened. So the state printed again. Each issue of new francs was meant to buy time. Each one quietly destroyed trust. Markets noticed before people did. Foreign investors began to sell French assets. The franc weakened on international exchanges. Imports became more expensive. Inflation crept upward not dramatically at first, but steadily, and the government responded the only way it knew how: more printing. This was the fatal loop. As the currency weakened, prices rose. As prices rose, public anger grew. As anger grew, politicians feared austerity. And fearing austerity, they printed more. By the early 1920s, France was trapped. The war had ended, but its financial aftershocks were now driving the nation toward a different kind of collapse. One measured not in casualties, but in purchasing power. The franc was still called money, but it was beginning to behave like something else entirely. In the next part, we will see how this invisible decay entered everyday life. How ordinary French citizens discovered that money could vanish without ever being stolen. Hyperinflation does not announce itself with panic. It enters quietly through the market stall, the bakery, the rent notice slipped under a door. In early 1920s France, life did not collapse overnight. People still went to work. Cafes stayed open. Trains still ran. But something subtle had changed. Money no longer behaved the way memory said it should. Prices began to rise faster than wages. At first, workers blamed shopkeepers. Shopkeepers blamed wholesalers. Wholesalers blamed transport costs. Everyone blamed someone nearby because the real cause was distant, abstract, and invisible. A loaf of bread that cost 1 franc now cost 1 franc 20, then 1 franc 50. Wages rose too, but slowly, after negotiations, after delays. By the time a raise arrived, prices had already moved again. The effect was psychological before it was catastrophic. People stopped thinking in months. They began thinking in days. Housewives rushed to markets early in the morning, knowing prices could change by afternoon. Salaries were spent immediately, not saved. Cash lost value the longer it was held. Saving became irrational. The middle class, clerks, teachers, retired officers felt the pain most sharply. Their incomes were fixed. Their savings were denominated in francs that quietly melted. A lifetime of discipline dissolved without drama, without theft, without warning. Pensioners watched their purchasing power shrink each week. Renters saw landlords demand adjustments. Small businesses struggled to price goods that might cost more to replace tomorrow. Trust, the true foundation of money, began to fracture. When people no longer believe that currency will hold value, behavior changes. People hoard goods instead of cash. They buy durable items, not because they need them, but because objects feel safer than numbers on paper. This behavior, rationale at the individual level, accelerated the problem. Increased demand pushed prices higher. Higher prices justified further wage demands. Wage pressures frightened businesses. Businesses raised prices preemptively. Inflation fed itself. The government issued reassurances. Officials insisted the franc was sound. They blamed speculation, foreign conspiracies, profiteers. Laws were proposed, price controls debated. None addressed the core issue. Money supply kept expanding. By now, ordinary citizens understood something crucial even, if they lacked the vocabulary to explain it. The problem was not greedy merchants. It was not lazy workers. It was not moral decay. It was arithmetic. Too many francs chasing too few goods. France was learning a brutal lesson. When money loses its ability to measure value, society loses its ability to coordinate reality. And once that happens, collapse no longer looks dramatic. It looks ordinary. In the next part, we will explore how the franc began to lose not just domestic trust, but international credibility, and why foreign exchange markets accelerated France's crisis. Inflation can be explained away. A collapsing currency cannot. By the early 1920s, France's problem was no longer confined to markets and kitchens. It had moved into the realm that governments fear most: foreign exchange. The franc was weakening not just at home, but abroad. On international markets, currencies speak honestly. They do not listen to speeches. They do not respect patriotic assurances. They respond only to supply, demand, and confidence. And confidence in the franc was draining fast. Before the war, the French franc had been considered stable, conservative, respectable. It was not the world's reserve currency like the British pound, but it was trusted. Investors held it willingly. Trade contracts used it without hesitation. That reputation was now unraveling. Foreign traders began demanding payment in pounds or dollars instead of francs. Importers found that buying coal, machinery, or grain required more and more French currency for the same goods. Every drop in the franc's external value fed back into domestic prices. This created a vicious cycle. A weaker franc made imports more expensive. More expensive imports raised domestic prices. Rising prices increased pressure on the government. The government printed more money. More money weakened the franc further. Speculators noticed. Some were opportunists, others were simply hedging against obvious risk. But their actions had the same effect. They sold francs, accelerating its fall. Each sell-off confirmed fears. Each confirmation encouraged more selling. The French government reacted with denial. Officials accused speculators of sabotage. Emergency measures were announced. Committees were formed. Laws threatened punishment for attacks on the franc, but confidence cannot be legislated. Behind closed doors, policymakers understood the danger. A collapsing currency was not just an economic problem, it was a national humiliation. It suggested weakness, mismanagement, decline. France had survived invasion. It had survived trench warfare. It had survived mass death. But a weak franc signaled something worse: loss of control. Foreign creditors grew enormous. France still owed enormous sums to Britain and the United States. Repayment depended on a functioning currency. A falling franc made repayment harder, which made lenders even more cautious. Diplomacy became tangled with finance. France pressed Germany harder for reparations, hoping German payments would stabilize its own finances. When Germany failed to comply fully, France escalated most famously by occupying the Ruhr in 1923. This move was not just political, it was monetary desperation. The occupation aimed to extract value directly coal goods production because paper promises were no longer enough. But the move backfired. It destabilized Germany further, disrupted European trade, and worsened financial instability across the continent. The franc did not recover. Instead, it slid further, carrying public morale with it. By now, even those who had ignored economics felt the weight of the crisis. The franc's decline was printed in newspapers, whispered in cafes, debated in parliament. France could no longer pretend this was temporary. The currency was telling the truth, and it was a truth no one wanted to hear. In the next part, we will see how panic entered politics and how emergency measures nearly broke the French state itself. When money collapses, politics follows. By the mid-1920s, inflation was no longer just an economic issue. In France, it was tearing through the political system itself. Governments rose and fell at a dizzying pace. Cabinets collapsed not over ideology, but over numbers that refused to balance. The Third Republic had always been fragile, but now it was brittle. Every political faction blamed another. The left accused conservatives of protecting bankers and creditors at the expense of workers. The right accused the left of fiscal irresponsibility and reckless spending. Centrists tried to hold the middle ground and were crushed by both sides. No one wanted to deliver the one solution everyone feared: stabilization. Stabilizing a currency meant pain. It meant cutting spending, raising taxes, ending easy money. And in a country still traumatized by war, pain was politically radioactive. Veterans demanded pensions, reconstruction demanded funding, workers demanded wage increases to keep up with prices, industrialists demanded protection from foreign competition. Every demand was rational on its own. Together, they were impossible. Parliament became a battlefield of postponement. Emergency budgets were passed with loopholes. Temporary measures became permanent. Each new government promised reform after the next crisis, after the next election, after conditions improved. Conditions never improved. Public trust eroded rapidly. Citizens no longer believed that elected officials could or would defend the value of their savings. Strikes multiplied. Demonstrations filled the streets of Paris and provincial cities alike. Radical voices grew louder. On the left, revolutionary rhetoric intensified. Some openly admired the Soviet experiment, arguing that capitalism itself was the disease. On the right, nationalist movements accused Parliament of weakness, corruption, and betrayal. Inflation is a gift to extremists. It convinces people that moderation has failed. Meanwhile, international pressure mounted. Foreign lenders demanded clarity. Investors demanded discipline. Diplomats quietly warned that France's credibility was eroding, not just financially, but politically. The franc had become a symbol, not of recovery, but of dysfunction. Behind the scenes, a quiet consensus began to form among financial elites and senior officials. The crisis could not continue indefinitely. Either France would impose discipline voluntarily, or it would be forced into it by collapse. This realization did not bring relief, it brought fear, because everyone knew what stabilization required, and everyone knew who would pay for it. The longer politicians delayed, the harsher the eventual correction would be. France stood at the edge of a decision it had avoided since the war ended. Whether to protect the illusion of stability or to confront reality, regardless of the social cost. In the next part, we will meet the man who was finally handed the task no one wanted to end, the brutal measures that almost tore France apart. By 1926, France was out of time. The franc had fallen so far, and confidence had eroded so deeply that continuation was no longer an option. What politicians had postponed for years was now unavoidable. Stabilization would happen by choice or by catastrophe. The man tasked with executing it was Raymond Poincaré. Poincaré was not charismatic, he was not theatrical, but in moments of crisis, France did not look for inspiration, it looked for arithmetic, and Poincaré understood numbers. When he returned to power in July 1926, his message was blunt. There would be no miracles, no painless solutions. The franc would be saved only by restoring trust, and trust required sacrifice. The government moved fast. Taxes were raised sharply, including on income and profits. Public spending was cut, subsidies were reduced. State finances were forced back toward balance. Most critically, the printing presses slowed down, then stopped. This was the moment inflation finally met resistance. But resistance came at a price. Interest rates were increased to attract capital back into France. This stabilized the franc on foreign markets, but tightened credit at home. Businesses struggled. Unemployment rose. The correction was swift and brutal. The franc stabilized at a new, much lower value than before the war. Not at its old prestige level, not at the illusionary past, but at reality. This decision was deeply controversial. Many saw it as surrender. Others saw it as salvation. What mattered was that for the first time in years, prices stopped spiraling. People could plan again. Savings stopped evaporating overnight. Confidence fragile, damaged, but if returned, foreign capital flowed back. The franc strengthened modestly. Inflation slowed to a crawl. The emergency had passed. But stabilization did not erase the damage. The middle class had already lost much of its wealth. Social divisions had hardened. Political extremism had found fertile ground. The memory of betrayal lingered. France had survived hyperinflation, but it had not escaped unscarred. The lesson was clear, though few wanted to hear it. Inflation is not defeated by hope, not by rhetoric, not by delay. It ends only when governments choose discipline over comfort, and when societies accept that there is no such thing as free money. In the final part, we will examine what this forgotten crisis left behind, why its lessons still haunt modern economies today. France did not collapse. That is why this crisis is forgotten. There were no wheelbarrows of cash, no overnight currency annihilation, no single dramatic moment that forced the world to look. And yet, the damage was real, deep, and permanent. The hyperinflation of the early 1920s quietly rewired French society. It punished discipline and rewarded speed. It erased savings while leaving debts lighter. It taught citizens that loyalty to a currency could be betrayed without warning and without apology. Most of all, it revealed a truth that governments rarely admit. Money is not strength, trust is. France believed it could delay reality, that time would heal the wound, that growth, reparations, or optimism would restore balance without sacrifice. Each delay made the final correction harsher. When discipline finally came, it worked, but only because there was nothing left to lose. The franc stabilized not through genius, but through exhaustion, and the cost of waiting was staggering. A generation of middle-class savers was wiped out. Political extremism gained legitimacy. Social cohesion weakened. Faith in parliamentary competence eroded. These scars did not vanish with stabilization. They shaped the politics of the 1930s. They weakened France's ability to respond to the next crisis. And when Europe slid again toward war, France entered it economically and psychologically diminished. This is the danger of inflation that unfolds slowly. It does not feel like theft until the account is empty. It does not feel like collapse until trust is gone. It does not feel political until society fractures. France's experience carries a warning far beyond its borders. A currency is not a symbol to be defended at all costs. It is a tool meant to serve the economy, not dominate it. When governments prioritize appearances over arithmetic, delay over discipline, comfort over correction, the bill always arrives, and it never goes unpaid. The forgotten hyperinflation did not end France, but it ended an illusion. The illusion that great nations are immune to bad math. The illusion that printing can replace productivity. The illusion that confidence can be demanded rather than earned. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes with remarkable consistency. And every time a government believes it can postpone consequences just a little longer. France's quiet crisis of the 1920s stands as a reminder: you can delay reality, but you cannot escape it.